Okay, we're recording. Last time we had our basic introduction to Vajrayana Buddhism or Tibetan Tantric Buddhism. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most famous books in all of Buddhism, and one of the most famous books coming out of Tibet, for sure, which is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And we're going to talk about it as it exemplifies and embodies Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Tantric Buddhism, and we're going to go over what it says and what it is. So, so let's get to that. We are gonna. There we go. Oh, go back. There we go. The Tibetan Book of the Dead. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, by the way, I forget whether the man was a English scholar or a German scholar, but a couple hundred years ago, the man who made a translation of the Book of the Dead, it's called the Book of the Dead, he called it the Book of the Dead, because there's a very famous book called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Of course, the Egyptians would have a Book of the Dead, necrophiliacs that they are. But Tibet, in Tibet, this text, the text that we're talking about today, was never known as the Book of the Dead. That's a European interpolation. The Bardo Thodel, as its transliteration out of the Tibetan language calls it, has a meaning something like liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. The intermediate state is what's called the Bardo. The Bardo was very, very obscure, although in recent years you do hear more and more people talking about the Bardo. And there is a very nice, entertaining little novel called Lincoln in the Bardo that I read last year. I forgot the name of the author, but it's a nice little book. So this concept of the Bardo is kind of out there for some reason. Let's talk about what that is. I mean, again, it's that intermediate state, intermediate between lives. So again, look how tantric and sort of Hinduish this whole thing is. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is really hardcore tantric practice. One thing you got to say for Tantra, Tantra is very proactive. Tantra is all about having techniques and having approaches. Oh, so you're dying? Oh, well, there's an app for that. I mean, that's just the way Tantra rolls. So here's and this book too. I mean, sometimes you'll get mixed messages about that. This book may have been chanted eventually at around dying people or at funerals around dying people, then to comfort people. So then the story would be that the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that the Bardo Thodel, would be something that you would sort of read to comfort someone who was dying. And I can see that because it's got a really, as we'll see, the dogma in the book about getting off the wheel of karma during the Bardo is really quite liberal and very generous. So I think that might tie into the idea that this was a book that people would have these chants that people would have when someone was passing away. There's a real cool tradition throughout. There's a real cool tradition throughout Himalayan Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism. You want your texts to be very ancient and old, sort of the older the better. So obviously, if you're a booster of a text or a tradition, you're going to overstate how old it is. So the way that sort of manifests itself in Tibet and China was with these terma texts. And the terma texts then would be texts that had supposedly been hidden away for hundreds of years or even thousands of years. Why not? Because the idea was that the Buddha thought that, or some Buddha thought that, well, people aren't really ready for these texts yet. And so then later you can find them, you can reveal them, and then what you can say is, well, these are texts, these are really old texts. These are texts actually written by the Buddha himself. In fact, the Buddha himself is just one person, one Buddha in a long line of Buddhas, and all of this stuff is coming down to us. So there's it's kind of a literary device and a kind of magical story. But then on the other hand, they actually would take sometimes these whole libraries of Buddhist writings and seal them up in caves and hide them in walls and monasteries and things. So they actually would do that because, they thought it was a cool idea. I mean, and there have been amazing discoveries in the early 20th century. Whole libraries of Buddhist writings and scrolls were discovered in caves in China. So, so in any event, these writings, the Bardo Thodel is a larger part of a larger work, the profound Dharma of self-liberation through the intention of the peaceful and wrathful ones. So we'll get to that, peaceful and wrathful ones. Because the Bardo, one thing about the Bardo is sort of coming out of the shell of this existence, the body of this existence, where you've been insulated by your body from the spiritual realm. And so now you're going to sort of go out into what is in some sense, into just, let's just say, the very intense spiritual realm, unmediated by the senses, unmediated by the body. And that's going to be what it's like in the Bardo. And that's the reason why you're going to need some yoga. That's the reason why you're going to need some Tantra here. So it probably dates from the 14th century. That's what most people think, that this work was written in the 14th century by Karma Lingpa. This stuff is all very intensely studied. I think that it's important to get straight on what it is that you're looking at, but then the important thing is to actually look at the text and try and take a look at what it says. So here's Padmasambhava, who was the legendary founder of, or introducer of, Buddhism into Tibet in the 8th century. And then the legend then would be that he's actually the writer of the Bardo, and then he hid it, and it wasn't until 500 years later that it was discovered. Okay, so the period of time after the death of one body and before the reincarnation. And I saw one source saying it lasts for 47 days. I mean, you get the idea. As they say, part of the problem is that you're not going to be incarnate anymore. And so the direct stimulation might be just too much for you in the Bardo, and you have to navigate your way through the Bardo. So that's the problem. So you need to do some yoga in order to be able to handle yourself and not freak out in the Bardo. Because, bottom line, if you freak out in the Bardo, you're not going to be able to ascend on the wheel of karma or get off the wheel of karma. So Bardo Tantra aims to prepare the soul for the Bardo environment. A matter of self-control. Tantra is all about self-control. Tantra is the adepts walking on fire, lying down on a bed of nails. That's Tantra. Tantra are these practices, proactive practices to achieve some kind of spiritual aim. And I really I'm not going to do it here on the video, and that's too bad because it doesn't come out on YouTube. I ought to be able to do up these links and stuff. But in the links that the students will get, I'm really going to give you some links to some of this. It's not exactly music. It's actually kind of hard to search it because sometimes people will index it as music, but it's chanting and then noises that are the noises like the spirits in the Bardo. And it's really amazing. And and I'm going to give you some links to that. I think that's one of the coolest finds in terms of looking at the Tibetan Book of the Dead and looking at Himalayan Buddhism and Himalayan Buddhist culture in general. The music is really cool. There's nothing like it. So just looking then at the actual structure of the book, the Bardo Thodel. Now here's an interesting argument. That first bullet point, it looks like a pretty good argument. It says, look, I mean, obviously, if samsara in the world of dukkha, and the condition of samsara is the condition of being incarnate, then obviously while you're in a body, you're not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to escape from samsara. And so then it turns out that you need the bardo, you need this intermediate period in order for that to happen. Again, so here now notice also we're well off into the realm of sudden enlightenment. And by the time Buddhism gets to China, around this time actually, that issue of works versus grace will also be a big, big issue for Chan Buddhism in China. So I was talking about sort of the liberalism of the Bardo Thodel. And remember, again, you might be reading this to someone who is passing away, or people might be chanting this around someone who's passing away. So they say there are 4 opportunities to escape samsara during the Bardo. Now, the existence of the Bardo, by the way, was a theological point of dogma that was debated amongst Buddhists for a long time. There were Buddhists who bought it, Buddhists who didn't. So one is, at the moment of death, you may see the clear light, and clear light Buddhism is actually the most popular Buddhist sects in Asia. Most Han Chinese people who are Buddhists are clear light Buddhists. Stress on positivity here is, in as much as it relates to the Bardo Thodel, the idea is at the moment of death, you see that clear light come out into that light. So that could just happen at the moment of death. There's the moment of death. Then there's a part of the Bardo where positive spirits approach you. Then there's a part of the Bardo where negative spirits approach you. Then there's the point of rebirth. And so these are the 4 different times, the 4 different periods of the Bardo. So the first one, the moment of death, there's the possibility there. And then the peaceful deities, and if you can, the peaceful deities also, are sheer energy to you without your body. If you are peaceful, you can be accepted with them. They will take you off the wheel of karma. And then after that, there are the angry and wrathful deities and spirits, the scary ones, the gargoyle figures in this art that we've been looking at, and that's real scary. And so there you've got to not lose your cool, not panic. In general, the point is not to be overwhelmed. And finally, and probably a little more esoterically, right? I mean, the idea that the soul has to choose which body to enter at the moment of rebirth. And that looks more like an opportunity to maybe make a mistake, I think. So in any event, some kind of structure, something to walk you through there within the context of these basic concepts of the necessity of the soul to navigate the spiritual landscape outside the body. And so, again, that kind of, we're going to talk about positive visualization in a moment here. Vajrayana meditation. Almost all the time when I'm talking about meditation in this class, it's what I would call mindfulness meditation, which is essentially the practice of identifying thoughts and feelings as identifying thoughts and feelings, observing them, I guess, as that, and putting them to the side and getting back to the breath. The aim being to clear the empty space and, diminish the crazy mind contents. But there is also guided meditation. And as always then, much more characteristic of people like, for example, the Guru Maharaji or Bhagwan Rajneesh, someone like that from a Tantric Hindu tradition is going to get you into guided meditation. Guided meditation is mood-changing meditation. You're going to visualize typically something very positive and get yourself into a positive state. Tantra is all about self-control. Tantra, as they say, is kind of biofeedback. I think might be something that actually sort of unifies Tantra altogether. It's a lot about the body. It's really about being in the body a lot. So the jewel tree of Tibet, you know, you're on the slope of a beautiful mountain covered with flowers, and you're looking down onto a beautiful lake at the bottom, and there's an island in the middle of the lake, and there's a tree growing from the island. It's covered in jewels. It's hanging with jewels like fruit. There's jewels glittering in the sun. And of course, among the fruits of that are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And remember from the Pali Canon, the Tripitaka, the three baskets. So again, this kind of a visualization of plenty, visualizing satisfaction with the practice as experiencing plenty, you know, a cornucopia. And so in that kind of tradition, then a tradition of positive visualization, of course, just in your own life, that's Gestalt therapy. And that's going to be what that practice is going to help you. But also necessary for navigating this Bardo, this intermediate period when you're not in your body. And of course, chanting is absolutely central to Tantra. If there's anything that's Tantric, it's chanting. And Himalayan throat songs, Mongolia also has this kind of deep throat music. I call it music. I mean, you know, again, that's another question. And so you have two elements of the sound. One is the chanting, including very guttural sort of throat chanting. And, excuse me. On the other, is kind of building percussive crashes and sounds, sudden sounds, which are meant to mimic the sounds of these spirits in the Bardo. And so your yoga is you're learning not to be rattled by the spirits in the Bardo. And I really urge you to try. It's a little hard for me to plug it right into your ear. I will try in the links. But you should try to listen to that sound. It's an amazing sound. So here's more sort of the jewel tree of Tibet. You can see at the bottom of the tree, and maybe it's on a little island there. This is a detail from a larger picture. And you've got blue Shiva in the middle. Shiva. The last thing I want to talk about while we're on the topic are Buddhist mummies. There is it's self-mummification. These are not people who are mummified by anybody else. They also don't have sarcophagi or anything like that. They are up in a high desert area, very dry, very cold. So bodies are preserved. Now remember that these people have been doing forever are using biofeedback techniques, which they are adept at slowing down, for example, their bodies. Also manipulating their temperatures. There's a book called Autobiography of a Yogi that gets you into all of that in an interesting way. I recommend that book. So then elderly monks would sometimes meditate until death, which to me is not really that surprising. Again, these are expert fasters, and I don't know, my grandma decided she wanted to die. I don't know. Looks to me like that's fine. They have even found 500-year-old mummies. A stupa fell over not too long ago, and they found a 500-year-old monk who was very well preserved, just sort of in the basement of this stupa. Of course, the legend of the magic was then that their bodies would never deteriorate because they just sort of come into some sort of, it is like an Egyptian idea that way, that they sort of come into some kind of magical thing where the body was connected into what's transcendent. And so there are these Buddha statues with mummified monks inside them. Trafficking them is illegal. I don't think I would really want them. They seem a little creepy, but they exist. There's one. You can see, you x-ray the Buddhist statue and there's a Buddhist monk in there. Of course, it was Donald Trump would say, well, I want a Buddhist monk in mine. No, I'm sorry. Shouldn't say such things. Okay, so, all right, so the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I think a takeaway from this, as far as I'm concerned, is to see that there's a question with Tibetan Buddhism as we move on here, as to what it is. I mean, it is unique because it is taking Hindu techniques or Hindu styles and structures and using them to express what are distinctly Buddhist ideas. And in that way, Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism is really very unique. It is a real synthesis of uh, Hindu Tantra and Buddhism and Buddhist teachings. So and it is fabulously colorful and rich in detail. So it's a really precious part of, I think, our international cultural heritage. But it's also really fun stuff to read. I recommend, as I did last time, that you look at the writings of Robert Thurman, his book, The Jewel Tree of Tibet. He also has an edition of the Tibetan Book of the Dead as well. So, all right, so the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So that's our second one on Tibetan Buddhism. So good. I shall talk to you soon. Bye-bye.